So I had a lot of fun researching the historical outfits for my vsmp fashion animation meme, and I really want to talk about it, so buckle in. So here are the parameters for the dresses I'm going to be looking at. vsmp Scott is around 1400 years old, I'm pretty sure. Thus, if vsmp is set in the 18th century and he was asleep for 600 years, that means the time range of clothing I can reference is from the 4th century to the 12th century. As per Scott's comment, all the cultures have to have recognizable dresses from the modern standard. I'll be specifically referencing women's clothing because I think what Scott means is that he dabbled in clothing of the opposite sex that were also dresses. And of course, all the clothes are going to be rich people clothes because, you know, it's Scott. And I just want to preface, for the fashion vocabulary, I want to pronounce it correctly from the language it comes from. However, I'm not going to be perfect, so I'm trying my best though. So the first dress is from the Tang Dynasty. So the Tang Dynasty, which is a Chinese dynasty, lasted from 618 to 907 CE. It's generally regarded as a golden age in ancient China, with a good economy, stable political environment, and thriving arts and poetry. As a result, women's fashion makeup, and let me be specific, upper class women's fashion and makeup, became more vibrant, revealing, and experimental. What really stood out to me was the makeup from this time, specifically the Middle Tang era. So this is after the Anglo-Saxon Revolution, which created instability within the Tang dynasty. While women outside the imperial court had lighter and simpler makeup, court ladies reflected the instability of the time with more somber and gothic makeup. I really like how the makeup in this era looked, and I think the more gothic elements would fit Scott really, really well. What stood out the most to me is the blood-stained makeup, where women would draw red scratch marks on their cheek, and like blood? Scott? Vampires? Like come on, it's perfect. They also had dark red or black lipstick, and as per the general trends of the Tang dynasty, lipstick was mostly focused in the middle of the lips for this like puckered or rosebud look. Eyebrows were also shaved and then drawn higher and slanted for a worried expression. And lastly, we have the huadian, which is a typically floral symbol, although it can be like a dot or something else in the middle of the forehead. Scott may or may not have something else in the middle of his forehead, so the huadian is kind of like peeking out from there, but it's definitely a very consistent feature of Tang Dynasty makeup, so I did want to include it. Now for clothing, Scott's outfit is going to be referencing the early Tang, so 613 to 703 CE. We have the jiansi, which is a skirt with an empire silhouette and vertical stripes. The more stripes you have, the richer you are, so Scott has at least 20. There's also long, thin sleeves, as you can see, and an interesting trend of the time was the top showing cleavage or having a low neckline. Scott's covering his chest in the main drawing, but for the low guys, you can see how low the neckline is. This was kind of a mythical trend for ancient China, because generally women had more modest clothes, which is true of the other dresses I'm portraying for Scott. The top with the elbow-length sleeves is called the banbi. It's cropped, and in this case, it's also tucked into the waistband. And last but not least, we have the wei mao. This is a super cool and mysterious veiled hat used by women while traveling, but Scott is using it to keep his head shaded, which, I mean, I wonder why. For the little drawings of Scott, he's putting on makeup in a silver mirror, this one specifically, and I think we all know he absolutely cannot see anything he's putting on, which I thought was pretty funny. So Scott is holding chrysanthemums. In Chinese culture, these flowers represent autumn, which is a motif I wanted to lean towards with the whole like Halloween vampire thing. The flowers also represent longevity, and you know, like 1400 years. That's a pretty long time. This is not really the case in Western culture, but for Chinese culture, white represents death and mourning, and Scott is, you know, more of the former, thus he does have white chrysanthemums. However, I guess when we like say he's technically dead, it's not really like in the traditional sense, so his white flowers are a little stained with red, because he's silly like that. He also has 4 chrysanthemums, which is an unlucky number, because in Chinese 4, 4, sounds a lot like death, 4. I also want to add, with inclusions like the chrysanthemums, I know what I'm trying to represent is accurate to Chinese culture, but I'm not completely sure if it's accurate to Chinese culture in the Tang Dynasty, since it's harder to research specific questions like that. The whole being accurate to the culture, but maybe not the time period, does happen again, so I will like preface if that's the case. Alright, next up is Anglo-Saxon clothing. The Anglo-Saxons were a cultural group in England from the 5th to 10th century. Specifically, I'm referencing Anglo-Saxon women's clothing from the 5th to 6th century. When I was doing research for this, I had less to go off of than the other dresses here, and some of the information was conflicting or unsure, but I will try my best to describe the clothing. Women had a pretty simple, long-sleeve underdress, and over that, a peplos-like garment that was shorter, although research varies on the lengths it could be, and both of these could be linen or wool. When I say peplos-like garment, garment, I mean a tube of fabric with two parts pinched at the front and back that are held together by brooches. Since I'm still learning how to draw clothing folds, I just want to clarify that's what I was going for in case it doesn't look like that. Under the peplos, they had a belt with items hanging off of it like a chatelaine. This is kind of like a historical version of a purse that hangs smaller, everyday items off of it. Scott's are a little unconventional. He has scissors, a seax knife sheath, you can see he's holding the knife itself, and some bones. This is why the peplos is shorter, because then it's like easier to reach under it to get the little tools. For colors, I'm pretty sure they are accurate the time period because I'm referencing this diva right here. To secure the peplos, Scott has a tablet woven sash belt. Tablet weaving was pretty popular in Anglo-Saxon England, and it creates these long strips of woven patterned fabric. I thought it was cool that the Anglo-Saxons had a good amount of jewelry as well, especially, like rich people. For example, it was common to have these lines suspended between the two brooches that had amber and glass beads strung onto it. For Scott, he has canines mixed into it. People also wore rings, and if you were rich, they had these sleeve clasps instead of having like a drawstring to close their sleeve, and Scott has a bat-shaped one to fit his like vampire thing. Next up, we have the Junihitoe. The Junihitoe was a type of dress worn by court ladies and noblewomen in the Heian period from 794 to 1185 CE. Although it means 12 layers, they were usually closer to 5 uchigi, like these different colored robes, and it changes depending on season and rank. In this case, Scott has 7, and the outermost layer for him is the uwagi, which is not tucked into the belt. Fun fact, unlike the other dresses I'm portraying, Junihitoe are still worn formally in the modern day for special occasions within the Imperial House of Japan. For example, you can see Empress Michiko wearing the Junihitoe at the 1990 Japanese enthronement ceremony. With all the layers, the Junihitoe was quite heavy and cumbersome. It was also pretty difficult to draw. I already struggle with rendering fabric, but then having multiple layers of it made it even more confusing. So you can see me like tallying the layers of fabric as I drew them in the speed paint. Now, folding clothing left over right originated in Tang Dynasty China in the 7th century, which is so familiar, guys, and then it was adopted within Japan. That's why you almost always see kimonos and Junihitoe folded left over right. However, Scott's Junihitoe is folded right over left. Why is that? Did he make a mistake because he's a foreigner? Did I make a mistake when drawing him? Absolutely not, I swear. Because in Japanese folklore, certain creatures fold their clothing right over left. So this being ghosts, spirits, and dead creatures. And guys, what is Scott? A vampire, which are technically dead. You can tell I thought I was the smartest person in the world when I did this. However, I was not the smartest person in the world when I missed drawing a layer of the uchigi, so now it looks weird. I'm not gonna point it out because it's embarrassing, but you can find it yourself. Remember the thing I said about sometimes the elements are accurate to the culture but not the time period? So for the Junihitoe silk patterns, I know they can date back to the Heian period. However, I'm confident that all of them do exist in Japanese culture, even if they're more modern. You can like see me in the time lapse just like hand patterning all the little silk layers. And I'm just saying this because sometimes when you search up Heian era Junihitoe fabric patterns, it could be a little too niche and it's hard to get accurate patterns. One of the coolest things I learned about researching the Junihitoe was the technique of color laying called kasane no irome. The idea is that the many silk patterns of the Junihitoe would be dyed different colors and layered with specific color combinations to represent different seasons. So we have the underlayer of the hitoe and then the overlayer of the wagi. For Scott, I wanted to represent the autumn season. Firstly, because of the whole fall vampire thing again, but also because I thought the fall colors really did match his vampire colors. I saw a lot of reds, yellows, whites, and greens, and I think the dominance of red with some complementary green thrown in there could like really slay. I tried out a few example combinations on the source I was looking at, but none of them really resonated with me or matched the number of uchigi Scott had. So I took some notes of how the colors showed up and tried to make a combination that I think could work as a fall Junihitoe color scheme, but also matches Scott's preferred colors. I really like it, but I do want to say that the art of color layering is more nuanced than how I'm summarizing it right now, so I just want to be clear that how I'm representing it could be in the general ballpark, but not like 100% accurate. I think the general consensus is that the only human food vampires can consume is alcohol, so I wanted to have him drinking just a little bit of sake, which is an alcoholic Japanese drink. And he's low-key a little drunk, so he has sort of a wobbly pose and dilated eyes. The fan, called a hyogi, is to cover up the alcohol flush, but in general, it would be used by court ladies to shield their face and fan themselves because it'd get very, very hot in the Junihitoe. Heian noblewomen typically had the suberakashi hairstyle, characterized by long, straight black hair, sometimes in a low ponytail, but also it could just be let down. Let's just say Scott is trying to emulate the style with extensions, but he doesn't really have the right hair type for it. And lastly, we have the French Bliaut. The Bliaut was a dress, usually ankle length with wide sleeves and a fitted body, that was popular during the 12th century in Europe. It had variations throughout the continent, but I will specifically be focusing on the French style of Bliaut. We can see statues in Château, France, wearing Bliauts, which have pleats at the waist, sleeves that widen into a triangular shape that's around maybe 1/2 to 1/3 the length of the body, wide trim at the collar and sleeve hems, and a double wrapped belt/sash, which ties around the natural waist, crosses at the back, and then ties at the front under the stomach. The dress was likely made of thin silk, so my inspiration for how the fabric drapes are these full-length dresses that really emphasize the legs and the tummy, because first of all, they look really good, and I kinda saw that in the sculptures I was looking at, although the fabric folds aren't represented completely accurate. I'm sensing it, I swear. So I really worked on making the fabric look realistic, but one of my gripes is that the waist area isn't completely accurate. The descriptions I read said that the side seams were gathered, which creates horizontal lines across the stomach that were snug, and it kind of looks like this historical recreation. Whereas for Scott, I drew wrinkles that are more loose on his stomach, so that's something I definitely change if I pay more attention. Now for this dress, I also looked into what dyes and colors were realistic for medieval Europe and picked the most expensive ones, obviously. The general rule of thumb is that the more saturated the color is, the more expensive. So scarlets and maroons were pretty expensive, and purples even more so. Thus for Scott's trim, I settled on a deep mahogany. For the main body of Scott's Bliaut, I wanted to do a complementary green again, and I wanted to aim for that expensive jewel toned green, but he kinda got color graded into olive green because I'm sacrificing a bit of expensiveness for colors that look really damn good together. Scott's kind of just a flower husband in this outfit with all the rose imagery and colors and actual roses. The dark red trim has a pattern of fangs / heartbeat, but it really just looks like fangs on the borders and a 4-petaled flower in the middle. Unlike the previous periods I portrayed, women generally had their hair covered, such as with this oval silk veil. I felt like that was a bit plain, so I was also deciding to put a crown as well. However, while I was doing research, I found out that flower crowns were also a common thing people wore, and I think that's just really cute. So I decided to have a flower crown out of thorny roses, since roses were associated with love and beauty, while the thorns highlight their danger, which really just sums up vsmp Scott. To emphasize the thorny part of the roses, I had them dripping a little bit of blood onto Scott's white veil, which I just think is some cool imagery. And with that, that's all the research summarized that went into my fashion animation meme. I hope you guys like listening to me yap as much as I liked doing the research for this. Next video will probably be the 1K Q&A, so look out for that. But yeah, thank you!